gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. April is upon us and the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough. In our case, a tumbling fluorescence of arts, culture, politics and world affairs. An eventful week in politics in both England and Scotland. North of the border, the application of the Hate Crime and Public Order Act is prompting concerns for freedom of speech, with the Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling daring Scottish police to arrest her for describing as men some who identify as women. In Whitehall, as David Cameron says that British support for Israel is not unconditional, as the Foreign Office, generally thought to be Arabist, succeeded in turning the Foreign Secretary and indeed the Prime Minister. Does that secure a victory for Hamas? I'll also explore the Westminster honey trap scandal with my excellent political panel in a few moments' time. A few weeks ago, I was joined by Kasra Arabi, an Iranian critic of the regime of the Islamic Republic, when we discussed his work and the possible threats to his safety. Since then, Kasra's friend and fellow Iranian journalist Pouria Zerati has been stabbed, apparently in a state-sponsored terrorist attack, denied by the Iranian government. Kasra will rejoin me to discuss that attack. How does one explain the growing divide between men and women in Generation Z, or Z, over values and political beliefs? Numerous studies from many countries show that where a key determinant of political view was once age, now the young are fracturing along gender lines. Sociologist Ashley Frawley will consider that. And our resident science expert, Andy Lound, will look ahead to tomorrow's solar eclipse. Plus, Stefan Kyriazis will be here to talk about a reworking of Alfred Hitchcock's The 39 Steps that will be touring the country. Before all that, your news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning. 2 minutes past 11, our top stories this hour. Rishi Sunak says the government continues to stand by Israel's right to defend its security 6 months on from the October 7 terror attacks. Marking the occasion, the Prime Minister said the UK is shocked by the bloodshed and called for an immediate humanitarian pause in fighting. He also urged Hamas to release its hostages and implored Israel to get aid into Gaza more swiftly. Well, meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has used the occasion to stress that the UK's support for Israel is not unconditional. Writing in the Sunday Times, Lord Cameron said there is no doubt where the blame lies over the death of 3 British aid workers and added that this must never happen again. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby died in airstrikes carried out by the IDF on an aid convoy on April 1st. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, told GB News the UK will be obliged to stop arms sales if Israel has broken international law.
I absolutely support Israel's right to prosecute and to go after Hamas after what they did. But I also disagree with Israel's military response, which seems to be without clarity of what its strategy is. What's the governance structure that it's working towards? What is going to be the post-security environment that it's building? What we're seeing is actually in information, we're seeing this conflict spread beyond the Middle East because of what's going on, because of what Israel is doing. That is why David Cameron is saying there needs to be conditions on what's going on.
The government is preparing to deploy a Royal Navy ship to get more aid into Gaza. The vessel, which is not being named for security reasons, will deliver vital supplies. It's part of an international effort to establish a new humanitarian maritime corridor in the eastern Mediterranean. The Foreign Office has announced a £9.7 million package for aid deliveries, logistical expertise and equipment support. The Deputy Prime Minister has denied claims that the UK is failing to prepare for war. Oliver Dowden is defending the government after outgoing Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told The Telegraph only Ministry of Defence officials attended a wartime preparation exercise, which was meant for the whole of government. Former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has backed him up, saying that too many in government are, quote, just hoping everything will go away. But Oliver Dowden told GB News they're putting in the work.
Well, I don't know the specific incident that James was referring to. It is the case that we carry out wide-scale exercising programmes across government. Indeed, I did one recently for a national power outage involving several thousand different people across government. Now, of course, there is more work that we need to do across different areas, but we have stepped up considerably our effort.
2 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder after human remains were discovered in a park in South London. The Met Police say a 44-year-old man and a 48-year-old woman are now in custody after the body parts were found in Roden Fields in Croydon. The force say they believe the remains are those of one person. However, they have been unable to formally identify the victim at this time. A post-mortem examination is expected to take place today. Well, meanwhile, police are hunting for a suspect after a woman was stabbed to death in broad daylight in Bradford. West Yorkshire police were called to the city centre on Saturday afternoon following reports of an attack by a man who then fled the scene. The woman was taken to hospital where she later died. The force says she is yet to be formally identified but is understood to be 27 years old. Her family have been informed and are being supported by specialist officers. Well, Scotland remains at risk of power cuts and travel disruption as Storm Kathleen continues to bring strong gusts and heavy rain. 43 flood warnings are currently in place, and the Met Office has issued a new yellow wind warning affecting the East and Northern Highlands, the Isle of Skye and the Hebrides. Yesterday, winds reached 73 miles per hour in Drumalbin, South Lanarkshire. The Scottish Environmental Protection Agency says there is real danger to life around causeways, coastal roads and paths. Meteorologist John Ketley told us it's still causing problems.
Yes, Storm Kathleen is certainly creating a few problems in the northwest of the country in particular, but it's blowing everywhere. And it's still blowing pretty strongly this morning as well. I'm sure there are a few trampolines being blown over, a few garden fences coming down as well. Kathleen is only just to the northwest of the Hebrides. It's just easing slightly, but it's still gusting over 60 miles an hour in parts of the northwest this morning.
Finally, almost 5 million people have reported dental problems to the NHS 111 helpline over the last 5 years. Government data analysed by the Labour Party revealed that around 965,000 people were referred for treatment in the last year alone. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting said calls are skyrocketing, with people having to turn to private dentists or even carry out their own treatment. Health Minister Dame Andrea Leadsom says that the government's dentistry recovery plan will make services faster. However, dentist Dr Sam Jeffwer told us the situation is getting worse.
There are lots of dentists who are burning out, who aren't able to stay in the profession because they're having to see 30, 50 patients a day, to diagnose, treat, get them out of pain, all this sort of thing on a routine basis every single day, that can't be sustainable for anyone. And then we have an issue of the lack of new dentists coming in and the time frame being such a long time frame from getting someone qualified. So it's becoming more of an issue.
Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, straight back to Michael.
Thank you, Ray. Addison, the appalling Hamas terrorist attack on Israel exactly 6 months ago prompted an outpouring of sympathy for Israel and expressions of solidarity amongst the world's democracies. The support has proved short-lived, as many governments now take an increasingly hard line with the Israeli government over its management of the war in Gaza. Has our Foreign Office turned the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister? North of the border, the SNP government has this week enacted a law that was passed in 2021. The Hate, Crime and Public Order Act criminalises stirring up hatred against minority groups. With thousands of complaints already lodged, will it restrict freedom of speech? To consider those questions, I have with me the political commentator Matthew Stadlen, Conservative Life peer Daniel Moylan, and writer and broadcaster Emma Webb. Welcome back to you all. Emma, shall we start with you? I wonder if J.K. Rowling had been arrested, whether that might not have brought the whole edifice tumbling down.
I think it's a very clever, strategic move from her, because she is too big to cancel in many ways. So she does have the ability to take the stand that she has. Her willingness to put herself in that position to get arrested has, in one sense, clarified the law, because now it would be very difficult for them to arrest anybody for misgendering. But on the other hand, she's also sort of changed the interpretation of what the hate crime legislation could mean. So I think J.K. Rowling is a hero of free speech in that respect, because this legislation, as with the legislation that's recently come in Northern Ireland, is fundamentally bad law, because its aim is to transform Scottish society, to make Scotland into a nicer place by using controlling speech in order to control thought, because the aim is to get rid of hatred within society. And the concern all along has been that this was going to overwhelm the police. So police resources in Scotland have been cut and have been diminishing, and already they've received, I think it's around 6,000 complaints. The police will have to prioritise resources towards this, away from other things that probably people in Scotland would much rather them deal with, things like theft and burglary, which is a similar issue to what's been happening here in England as well. So fundamentally, this is a bad piece of legislation, and J.K. Rowling, particularly on the issue of women's rights and sex-based rights, has taken a stand that I think is extremely clever.
Daniel Moylan, in the last days of Nicola Sturgeon's reign, a rapist who identified as a woman was sent to a women's prison before being redirected after protest to a men's prison. I wonder whether the Scottish Government isn't guilty of misgendering, that this woman is now in a male jail. How can that possibly be allowed under the new law?
I know, it's a terribly worrying thought that they may be misgendering and not living up to the standards that they expect the Scottish people to meet. I think Emma's been generous in what she said, because I don't think this is particularly
I didn't mean to be.
Well, I think you have been generous in some ways, because I don't think this is aimed at making Scotland a nicer place. I think this is aimed at making Scottish society into a model of what the woke glitterati want society to be. And it's essentially aimed at stopping working class people expressing themselves, and men in particular, and white working class men are the target of this. So J.K. Rowling has escaped, and that sets a precedent, as Emma says, for how the law might be applied. But that precedent won't last forever. And there will be cases further down the road where the police will say, well, misgendering in this case was different from what J.K. Rowling said, so perhaps we will prosecute. We have no real protection. Scots have no real protection from that sort of approach. So I think Emma's being rather generous in what she says. It's more worrying than...
Matthew Stadlin, the Act was passed with support by all parties except for the Conservatives. So, I mean, Labour, I think, is somewhat on the hook with this as well. What's your own view, and is there the potential here to cause embarrassment not only to the SNP but to Labour too?
Well, I am a staunch defender of freedom of speech, I think, like most of us are, and I'm certainly a defender of freedom of thought. I also don't want to live in a society where hate is prevalent, and I think for any of us who have spent time online particularly, there is a lot of hatred out there. And I think we've got to be a little bit careful. I mean, you bring up this case of a rapist who is clearly male. In the 1980s and 1990s, when I was growing up, when there was still a lot of homophobia around, there's still some, but I'm very grateful for the fact, even though I'm not gay myself, that has sort of receded. Gay people generally would be tarred with this idea that homosexual men were paedophiles. And that was very, very damaging. And I think we're at risk here with picking out some cases where someone who identifies as a woman, as a trans woman, and is a rapist, we've got to be careful that we're not trying to tar all trans people, the vast majority of trans people, with that brush.
I think what people are trying to tar is the government that's been so thoughtless with its legislation. Matt, let me stick with you, but change the subject completely. Do you buy into the idea that the Foreign Office is Arabist and has turned the Foreign Secretary and turned the Prime Minister?
I mean, unlike Daniel, I haven't actually worked in the Foreign Office.
I have.
I've said, unlike you, I haven't.
Sorry.
So it's quite tricky for me to comment on that. I mean, unless I'm wrong, I think David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, in the early days or early years of him being Prime Minister of this country, talked about Gaza as being an open-air prison. So he clearly has a lot of sympathy for the conditions under which Gazans have lived for a very long time. Does that make him anti-Israel? No, I don't think it does. He's written an important piece in today's Sunday Times in which he expresses his support of the Israelis' right to defend themselves, but says that our support of them cannot be unconditional. And I think the vast majority, or certainly a majority of people in this country, would agree with the Foreign Secretary.
The article is probably more nuanced than some of the headlines have suggested, and I think it is worth reading. Emma, let me put it to you. We pulled out of Afghanistan and left the Afghans in the lurch. We're getting very weary of supporting Ukraine. And now we've made it clear after 6 months that we don't give unconditional support to Israel. What kind of message does this send to allies and to potential enemies?
Well, I think that you've hit on what I think is a fundamental problem with the way that they've been making certain statements, and particularly David Cameron, around this issue of what is essentially friendly fire, that they are not being a good ally to Israel, particularly after what happened on October the 7th. I think that the comments, particularly of Alan Duncan, who was in the Foreign Office during David Cameron's premiership, at a time when there were a number of incidents of friendly fire in Libya. Biden was also the vice president to Obama when there were numerous issues of friendly fire in Afghanistan, including people being killed at a wedding, a large number of women and children. During war and conflict, horrendous things like this happen. And now that's not to say that they're wrong for wanting Israel to look into what happened with this this airstrike on these aid workers. But at the same time, Israel have apologised. Israel have shown their willingness to look into that. I think that, and this is a point that Brendan O'Neill made perfectly in this week's Spectator, that I think they're trying to launder their own reputation through their criticisms of Israel. And it seems to me that they're trying to bend to pressure from protesters and other political pressure that they're facing to be more pro-Palestine. And I think that that is actually, I think, morally reprehensible.
Daniel Mollin, it strikes me that politically, at least, it could scarcely be going better for Hamas. What has been achieved after 6 months is that the lifelong allies, the democracies of Israel, are to some extent at least peeling away. Is this not exactly what Hamas would have hoped for?
And I think that the best thing that's happened for Hamas is this demand for a negotiated ceasefire, because coming from the West, because effectively it gives Hamas the upper hand in any negotiations. And we go back to Brexit. If you're told you can't walk away, you've got to do a deal, you can't walk away, then you'll have to accept the terms that are offered by the other side, which is what Parliament told Boris Johnson's government. And if you tell Israel they've got to accept a deal, sit down with Hamas, then Hamas, of course, can start to dictate the terms. And I think that is their principal military objective at the moment, is to get a ceasefire. Because if there's no ceasefire, they will not survive. The Israelis can destroy them.
I wanted to do a very quick run around. We've only got a moment left on this issue. I'm a friend of William Ragg. I'm a friend of Aubrey Allegretti. Aubrey Allegretti is a friend of William Ragg. Aubrey Allegretti is the journalist who reported the William Ragg story for the first time in the Times. Is there a case for a sort of declaration of friendly interest so that we know what's going on between presenters, members of Parliament, journalists? Matthew Stanton.
I don't know quite how that would materialise, but we're all human beings, aren't we? We're human beings in the media as we are in every other area of society, and I'm sure that our views as pundits, and I hope not, but I suspect investigations as journalists are influenced by with whom we're friends with. Think of James Forsyth. When Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor, they were best friends. Now he's working for him. And James Forsyth was the political editor, I think, of The Spectator and a columnist in The Sun.
Let's give the others a go. Emma?
I, for the most part, avoid commenting if someone that I'm close with is in the news or something like that. So I think you should be able to trust journalists to be honest where it's relevant, and where it's not relevant, because everybody knows everyone, I don't think that you could sort of have a blanket declaration of all of the people that you're close to or spend time with. But I think you can trust people to be honest.
Daniel, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I think journalists should make it clear if they choose to write about people they know, they should make that clear. Because the framing of a story, especially if you're breaking the story for the first time, how you frame it is very important. Here we've seen William Ragg framed as a victim. Not everybody would necessarily see it that way, and other journalists might have written it very, very differently. So I think it would help to know.
I found your views thoroughly interesting. Thank you very much for joining me on a Sunday morning. That's Emma Webb, Daniel Moylan and Matthew Stadlen. After the break, there is grave concern for Iranian dissidents after a journalist was stabbed outside his London home. We'll be speaking to expert Khazra Arabi.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I don't think you can go and watch a Shakespeare play unless you already know it. It's almost like you have to understand the story and the characters, and perhaps have even done a bit of reading into it. Because if you went completely blind, especially in today's world where we don't speak in that kind of way, it is, I think, probably a bit alienating.
But Dawn is saying it is alienating at the moment because of the lack of representation.
You know what, the actual phrasing they use, right, OK, the disproportionate representation propagated white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgender male narratives. I'm sure there's people sitting in a room going, what's the most ridiculous thing we can come up with today?
Yes.
But really, just chuck all these words at it, cisgender, and it's just insane. Of course, Shakespeare was what it was back in the day, and that's why it's mostly blokes and they're mostly white.
And lots of speculation that he was actually gay, isn't there? Because he never really saw Anne Hathaway very often and stayed away a lot of the time. I don't know, maybe he was a big
He might have been transgender for all I know. I mean, I don't...
Biggins, I'm looking at you.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that goes for the profession too. I mean, I do think I mean, I remember seeing Macbeth in London with Judi Dench and Ian McKellen, and it was one of the most exciting evenings ever. And it was a cold night at the Donmar Theatre, outside and inside, and that gave an atmosphere. There are certain things that you go along and see something else, and you think, I'll walk out in the interval.
Yeah. Macbeth is a sexy play, though.
Let's talk about, there's so many. Can I live to be 100?
Oh, this is depressing.
I think it is depressing. I like to stay here now. I don't want to live to 100.
Oh, don't say that.
Right behind you.
I don't even want to. My father died at 63. That'll be me gone this year.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. On Friday, the 29th of March, a journalist working for the Persian language TV channel Iran International was stabbed in the leg outside his home, what appears to have been an attempt to intimidate him. Portillo Zarati is already back at work, saying admirably that the show must go on. The regime of the Islamic Republic has denied any involvement in the attack, although police believe that the attackers fled abroad. The violence raises frightening questions about the security of Iran's critics overseas. And joining me now to discuss it is Kasra Arabi, who's Director of Research into the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps at the United Against Nuclear Iran organisation, and a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. First of all, my sympathy to your colleague who suffered this attack, and indeed to your community. Do we think that this was an attempt to kill him?
So I've spoken to Portillo, who's a very close friend of mine, and this has all the hallmarks of a targeted attack. Portillo himself told me that at that present time, when the two attackers struck, he had lost full control. If they wanted to kill him, if they wanted to stab him in the neck, if they wanted to stab him in the heart, they could have, but they precisely targeted the leg. Still, obviously, a horrific, horrific attack. This was a targeted attack to send a very threatening message to Portillo. So it was orchestrated, well planned. The fact that they have now fled the country reveals that it has all the hallmarks of an attack by the Islamic Republic of Iran, the regime. And we cannot forget the death threats Portillo has been facing. Portillo has had wanted dead or alive posted erected by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, in Tehran. And we also can't forget that there have been more than 15 terror plots on British soil that have been foiled by MI5, and that was announced by MI5. Despite all this, the British government has yet to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organisation.
And what would be the value of that?
So the prescription of the IRGC is not just a symbolic move. It would put maximum limitations on the IRGC's ability to operate on UK soil. So not only are we seeing that the IRGC is directly conducting terror plots on British soil, but it is using methods identical to ISIS and Al-Qaeda to nurture homegrown radicalisation, homegrown extremism here in London and across the country. The current sanctions regime on the Revolutionary Guard does not prohibit its ability to disseminate, propagate its jihadi propaganda. So prescribing the IRGC would give the government a full mandate to curb those activities. It would also equip our local police, our local teachers, etc., our local communities with the necessary tools to prevent against IRGC and Shia radicalisation, which is a current loophole. Again, blind spot. The current Prevent programme, the government's Prevent programme, is exclusively focused on Salafi jihadism, so Sunni Islamist extremism. And again, prescription would change that. I talk to commission members, and they've told me, for example, Kazra, we know at this centre they are spreading their radical Islamist ideology, but our fear is, because the IRGC is not prescribed, if we take action, we'll be labelled Islamophobic, and that will end our careers.
In general, you think that deterrence is the only thing that is effective against the regime. Give us examples of deterrence by other nations and where we fall short.
So there is a major deterrence gap right now, and I don't think prescribing the IRGC would equip our government, would equip our bureaucrats to take effective action, but it won't change the calculus by the regime in Iran. The regime in Iran believes it can get away with escalation without facing any direct consequences. Now, look at the methods through which Israel has been using. Israel has been directly targeting the IRGC's terrorist commanders inside of the country and across the region. And as a result, the Revolutionary Guard, Khamenei, the 84-year-old supreme leader who rules, by the way, as God's representative on earth, knows not to mess around with Israel and is fully deterred. Britain and the US must work together to target the IRGC's terrorist commanders, including in Iran, target the assets, these command and control centres, where terrorist operations are being planned to be carried out on British soil.
The television station is presently operating in Britain, but this wasn't always the case. At one time, it felt it couldn't. Tell me about that background.
Yes, so Iran International were notified that the current setup that they had was not safe and the government could not guarantee their security. And as a result, they were forced to move to Washington, D.C., where the Americans could guarantee their security. I mean, that sends a very weak message to the Islamic Republic. If the Islamic Republic can get in its operatives, or has local operatives, or is able to hire local gangs in the UK and get them out of the country within hours of an attack, I mean, that's extremely, extremely worrying. Now, as we said, Puri is back at work. We are doubling down. We will not cow to intimidation and threats, because this is bigger than just Puri, and I say that as his close friend, and this is what he said to me. This is about our values. This is about ensuring that the Iranian people's voice is heard globally, and that this regime cannot suppress Iranians or silence Iranians inside the country or outside.
Would you be so kind to send our best wishes to Puri and his family? And thank you so much for coming on today to talk to us.
Thank you, Michael.
Indeed. That was Kazra as Arabi. After the break, I'll ask why young men and women are diverging in their values and political beliefs. We'll be discussing tomorrow's solar eclipse as well. Stay with us, please.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
I believe our farmers can compete globally. If I visit some Somerset farmers, they are extremely efficient and highly competitive and innovative, and we need to encourage the best.
And it's a high-end product.
It's a high-end product.
Which was one of the points that were being made earlier.
And that we have to focus on what we are good at. And what our protectionism does at the moment is protects Irish beef farmers, French beef farmers and Dutch beef farmers, as opposed to buying cheaper beef from Australia. I have no desire
Jacob,
to protect EU farms.
The problem is that we live in the Northern Hemisphere and we have a very difficult climate. So actually, and we know this because when the Corn Laws were repealed in 1846, we know darned well what happened to agriculture.
It led to cheap bread. It made the society much better off.
This has been an argument going on for 150 years.
It's simply wrong. British agriculture didn't collapse at that point. There was a glut in the market 30 years later, which comes much after the Corn Laws.
Well, obviously, things were much slower in those days. It took a long time for that to impact.
Actually, do you know what? The principles of that debate and this debate are not dissimilar.
No, that's right.
They're not dissimilar.
It's very, very... I always go on about the Corn Laws. It's my favourite subject.
No. And it was a wonderful upwelling and grassroots campaign and all the rest of it. But whether we have a Conservative or a Labour government, do you actually think that a Labour government will be any closer or more connected to your community than this Conservative one?
The Labour government, it's in their interest to make sure that Britain has got food. And with the way the world is right now, We're in a very fragile situation, which is why we need food security. And every farmer I know talks about food security because we understand how much less food is being
We better have a look at net zero commitments too, but another time.
It's net zero commitments. It'll be wind farms.
Enough. We can argue all night about this.
Let's do it. I'm up for arguing all night.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Studies in numerous countries, Britain, America, Germany and South Korea, show a growing chasm in values and political beliefs between men and women of Gen Z or Gen Z, those born roughly between 1997 and 2012. Males and females increasingly fail to see eye to eye on many important issues. Women are becoming significantly more left-wing. Men are either staying put or they're shifting slightly to the right. To explore why that might be, I'm joined by author and sociologist Ashley Frawley. Welcome to GB News. So what is the sort of evidence that we have that shows that the genders are moving apart in this way?
Well, you've basically gone through the major findings. In a lot of countries, we're starting to see a divide in terms of the values held by men and women. In Asia in particular, you can start to see that men are increasingly feeling left behind and women are feeling more, I guess you would say, empowered. And this is the same, obviously, we've seen in English-speaking countries where women are rejecting older roles and drifting toward the left, and men, as you say, have stayed put or gone to the right. And there's also intergenerational divides in terms of values, which is kind of a more of a long-standing trend. You know, you've had studies about this going back to the even before the 1960s, but especially during the 1960s, this was a big question, like, why is there this huge generational divide in terms of values of the younger sort of student generation and the older generation? But the gender divide and the way that that's been increasing is something that's really caught a lot of social scientists' attention.
And what has changed? I mean, one thing might be the ever-growing importance of social media, and another might be the Me Too movement.
That's exactly it. And the question is kind of how widespread is this? You know, it's not the entire population is just suddenly sort of up and changed their values. Not all women have drifted toward the left. It's just a trend. And it may be that people who are more online, well, it's certainly the case for younger people and younger women. The more online they are, the more likely they are to report mental health problems, the more likely they are to be anxious, the more likely they are to be drifting toward what we now call the left, although I would dispute that is actually the left. So we're starting to see these sorts of things happening.
And what sort of reactions have men had to the Me Too movement? I think you might have used the phrase that they feel left out. Tell us a little bit more about what we know about this.
Yeah, so this has placed a huge wedge, I think, between men and women. That's really unfortunate. On the one hand, you do understand, like, women wanted to kind of push back against some of the things that they'd been dealing with for a really long time. If you are a young woman, probably your sense of growing up was defined by you realize that your body is changing because other people make it really obvious. And that's just such a weird thing to have to go through as a young girl. So it makes sense that people are rejecting this. On the other hand, like, how people used to meet each other was, catcalling on the street. I catcalled my own husband 20 years ago. And that now we meet each other online, and this is had an incredible effect on our relationships, where now people are like, I should vet you beforehand. Before I meet you, I should be able to see a sort of CV and make sure that you're the sort of person that I should meet. And even then, I'm going to tell a friend before I go out and meet you. So we already have this wedge of distrust before you've even met somebody. Whereas this idea that you would just sort of put yourself out there is just, wow, do you not realize that that's not acceptable anymore? And so the sort of natural way that people used to fall into relationships has started to degrade, and we now have much more of a bureaucratized system for negotiating the relationships between men and women. And that's had a really, really negative effect. It sort of paints all men as predators, and on the other hand, sort of all women as sort of damsels. And that's definitely not the case, but that's sort of the message that you get. And as a responsible person, you're supposed to kind of think like that. Like, you're not really supposed to go up and approach somebody. That's harassment. And someone shouldn't approach you. That's a bit weird. You know, that there's a process for these things, don't you know?
Actually, Frawley, I wish we had longer to go into this, because it obviously has the most important social consequences, including, for example, on things like the birth rate, and huge political consequences. Perhaps we'll return to this issue another day. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Now, if you're one of the growing number of our US cousins who tunes into GB News, you might be interested to hear about the solar eclipse tomorrow. The area over which the total eclipse falls stretches from Mexico across Dallas, Texas to Montreal. For those in Britain, only a sliver of the country, mostly in North Wales, is geographically placed to see a partial eclipse. Here to explain more is science journalist Andy Lound. Hello, Andy. Welcome back to GB News.
Thank you for having me.
So these things, total eclipses that is, occur reasonably frequently, about every 18 months or so, and some people race around to see them. I suppose what distinguishes this one is that a lot of people in the United States have the opportunity, if the cloud cover is suitable, to see a total eclipse.
Absolutely. This one's quite amazing because of the numbers of people that could actually get access to see it. Right across the United States, from fairly low down in the south, all the way to the corner of Canada. So it's quite a fantastic opportunity for so many people to actually observe the eclipse. General public, of course, and of course the access as well for other nations to send their people across as well with airports and flying. It gives you a great opportunity for loads of people to turn up on the United States doorstep to take a look at the eclipse. But also, of course, it means that the eclipse is going to be passing over some of the world's most sophisticated science facilities. Universities don't have to spend loads of money to fly off to one part of the world or the other. They're actually on site in some cases, or they only have to drive for an hour or so. So that's going to give a completely different perspective. It will be probably the most watched, from the public's point of view, eclipse in history, possibly the most studied eclipse in history because of the accessibility of scientific facilities for this eclipse.
As we were seeing from the pictures on our screen there, as the moon passes in front of the sun in the zone where there is a total eclipse to be viewed, darkness pretty much occurs. And that means that you'll be able to see some planets and stars. And that has a relationship with studying Einstein's theory of relativity. What is the connection?
Yes, because part of Einstein's theories was that the gravitational field of any planetary body, particularly the sun, will actually bend light. And therefore, the stars that you look at are slightly in the wrong position, and that's because of the bending of the light. And this is actually proved during an eclipse, so this is quite important. And again, what you will get to do is you get students to go out and actually do this study while you're there, to have a look at the nearby stars, visually nearby, line of sight effect, to see if they are in the right place or not. And if they're not, you do your calculations to work out how that light has actually bent. That's really quite an important study. And the fact that that was proven with an eclipse changed the course of the way people thought about gravity and the way light moves through space.
There are many other things to be studied. I know that some people are going to be studying animals, which have a tendency either to crowd together protectively, or indeed for some reason to mate at a time of day when they wouldn't otherwise do so. So there's a great deal of science in all of this. I thank you very much indeed, Andy Lound. Well, I will be eclipsed by the brightness of Stefan Kyriazis after the break, so don't go away, please.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see a mixture of sunshine and showers across the UK, quite blustery winds too. We have the remnants of Storm Kathleen up towards the northwest of Scotland there, tightly packed isobars indicating those blustery conditions. These bands of rain here on these occlusions moving in from the west at times, bring a fair few showers. Most of the showers up towards the northwest merging to some longer spells of rain. In fact, we have a wind warning enforced across the west of Scotland throughout the afternoon. Gusts of wind here up to 60 miles an hour or so at times. And notice quite a few showers moving in across Wales into northern England and the far southwest of England too. In the best of the sunshine towards the southeast, we'll see highs of 17 Celsius, 63 in Fahrenheit, but feeling colder towards the north in that blustery wind. As we go into the evening and during the overnight period, those showers across the south of the UK will tend to ease for a time, but notice some more persistent rain working back in from the southwest into parts of Wales, certainly by the end of the night. And towards the north, showers continue towards the northwest of Scotland. Elsewhere, some clear spells, allowing it to turn quite chilly. Parts of Scotland dipping down into low to mid-single figures, but holding up in the south with that cloud of rain coming in. As for Monday, outbreaks of rain gradually push up from the south across much of England and Wales. There will be some brightness for a time, particularly out towards the east and southeast. Best of the sunshine, though, generally reserved for parts of Scotland. Still some blustery showers towards the far northwest of Scotland. And temperatures once again peaking at 16 or 17 Celsius towards the southeast. That bit cooler towards the north.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christys. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christys tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The day is always too short when Stefan Kyriazis brightens it. Stefan, you've been to see Eugene O'Neill's A Long Day's Journey into Night, which I think is one of the most harrowing plays I've ever seen. I've seen it many times. I'm drawn back to it like a moth to a flame. Which production are you talking about?
So we're talking about the latest production, which is on at the Wyndhams, which is where it was last time as well. This time we've got Brian Cox and Patricia Clarkson as the two leads. This is very much, I mean, you said you're drawn back to it. It's a very circular play. It sort of goes round and round, and it can be a little bit frustrating, but you get this growing sense of doom that everybody involved is circling, I don't know, a drain, death, the end. And it's one day in a family's life, and it's beyond autobiographical. The father's name is James, the mother is Mary, the older brother is Jamie, all the same as Eugene O'Neill's family. They all repeat the patterns. The father is a faded actor. The mother is suffering with an addiction. The brother is an alcoholic. All exactly the same as his real life. It's in Monte Cristo Cottage in Connecticut, the same as Eugene O'Neill's family's cottage. And it's a play, it's about family, and it's one of those first great American family dramas, which is then, we've seen it all through Tennessee Williams, all the way through Arthur Miller, all the way to August Osage County. And it's beautiful, it's harrowing, and it's 4 characters, all in their own misery, all not quite able to connect. But it's also that thing of family. You can love and hate, you can support, you can pull them down. And it does that tremendously. It's very starkly staged. It's supposed to be an unloved home which the Mother Mary is always attributing a lot of their problems to. For me, the staging was a little bit, it was beautifully, there's probably some pictures there, it's beautifully Spartan, but it's a little bit too Scandi chic for me. You know, it all looks like it's plain wood and everything, but probably you think that would cost a fortune, and that's not the point of the play. This play, I think, pulls out everybody's isolation. So it's a little bit cool and cold, certainly at the start. It took a little bit of time to find its rhythm, certainly Brian Cox. Patricia Clarkson, I was actually watching thinking, is she acting badly? But then you realise that actually it's a very disconnected character that's fractured. So she's not quite a real person. And there's that sense that you can't...
She has an addiction.
You can't quite feel who she is. And by the end, as it builds, it all falls apart. It all gets terribly upsetting. And her final line of, I was happy for a time. By then, the whole audience was in it. And that line just falls quietly and is devastating. So it's beautiful. I think you probably saw Jeremy Irons and...
I think I saw Laurence Olivier.
Oh, wow, OK.
Yeah, and I've been to the house.
Oh, really?
Because the house exists, the cottage exists. And just to fill in, this was written during World War II.
1941, yeah.
Yeah. Eugene O'Neill didn't want it to be performed for 25 years.
Not at all.
His will was, as it were, broken. It was first performed in 1956. Anyway, you would recommend going to see it?
I would recommend for sort of completist, and it is a beautiful, staggering work. I mean, the words, the staging, the thoughts behind it, yes. The performances, it didn't quite get me, but it's still impressive, powerful piece. Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a kind of rather middle-ranking review.
Yeah.
We now have some things which are completely different because they're kind of escapist. First of all, the 39 Steps. I rather object to people saying that it's Alfred Hitchcock's because it was written by John Buchan originally.
It was.
But anyway, it's... well, what is it? A revival? It's been around forever, hasn't it?
Not quite. Without giving it all away, if we watch the clip, we've got the trailer, it'll show you exactly what they're doing.
If I were on stage, I would drop that steering wheel when that steering wheel is chucked in. So, yes, that's not exactly the way John Buchan wrote it. So it does look hugely entertaining.
Yeah, it's not quite Hitchcockian. It's exactly the same story. So it's a sort of unsuspecting chap. This time he was Canadian, I think, originally. Now it's back to being a posh Brit. And he gets involved in international espionage. He thinks he's trying to save the Allies from a nefarious foreign plot. All of that is there. The escape up to Scotland, train rides, murders. It's all in there. But as you can see, it's done rather as a spoof. And this was written... It was written by a small group for a local touring theatre and then readapted by Patrick Barlow. And that production, which was, I think, about 2009, went on to win Tony Awards, Olivier Awards. It's massive. You can see. It's all that kind of thing that when they're in the wind, they're doing all of this. Lots of funny accents. Go up to Scotland and they're all like the hoose. Very, very silly. It's jolly japes. I love some of the creativity. The two ladders, step ladders with a ladder across for a massive bridge that they're crossing. All these sorts of things. It's very inventive. It's very fun. They say it's 4 actors playing 130 characters. I don't know that I caught that many, but it's jolly japes. It all feels a little bit posh Amdram. Thoroughly entertaining. They keep it going.
Where is it?
This is on... Well, I saw it at Richmond, but this is an absolutely huge national tour. So it launched in Richmond, but it's going all over the country, I think, until August. And it's only 3-4 days in each place. So if you think, that's a lot of places up until August. So it's absolutely everywhere, and it's just fun.
Like a splendid evening out. And I dare say another splendid evening out that many people will have enjoyed, because it's been going for 25 years, is Mamma Mia.
Well, yes, because April the 6th, Mamma Mia is their 25th anniversary of the show. It's also, this is ageing us all, the 50th anniversary of ABBA winning the Eurovision. So it's on the same day. So it's all circling through. We had Bjorn in town from ABBA, and he popped up. I was there last night. He popped up on the stage at the Novello Theatre, where it's currently running, and he gave a beautiful speech.
Do we have a little clip?
We have got a little trailer, and this is for the 25th anniversary.
Almost the most telling thing about that clip was the audience at the end on its feet, which I imagine happens every night.
Absolutely on its feet. And they're very clever. It's a little bit like the Tina musical. You get a bit of a medley at the end. So it's wonderful all the way through, but at the end you get a kind of mega mix of 3 massive songs, and by then, absolutely we're all on our feet. Last night was truly special because they had the original cast back from 1999 in the audience. Some of them came up on stage as well. So there was a real charge in the air. But it's just, when Bjorn came on stage, and he's like, people are always asking him, how proud is he? What does he feel about his music? And he's like, he feels much more gratitude, and he feels humble when people come and tell him that their music affected them, that it made an emotional connection. And, you know, where would we be without music, he said. And the show is, we can see, it's cheesy and it's fun. It's a very light piece, but it's still about family dramas. And also, Judy Taymor came up on stage, who's the producer, and she made the very powerful point. 3 women, female director, female producer, female writer of the show. Back in the day, that was pretty extraordinary. And this show, 70 million people have seen this show. It's fun. I grew up on ABBA, so for me it's a no-brainer. But it's beautifully done. Maz Murray in the lead is stunning.
And as if we hadn't had enough of ABBA, we've got ABBA Voyage going as well, and that's proving to be a tremendous success, isn't it?
That's across in East London at the Royal Elizabeth Park. And yes, that's incredible. That's these kind of, I don't know if we call them the holograms, but they're avatars of ABBA. And
I've seen that too, and it's a remarkable show. But I shouldn't have distracted you. So, Mamma Mia, what distinguishes the 25 years? They're all having a party, but what else? Is it touring, or is it just...
This one at the moment, I mean, it's touring all over the world, and there are always touring productions. This one at the moment is just at the Novello, and it was to celebrate the actual theatre in London, the launch of it, and everything that came from it. But it's still going strong. 25 years, it doesn't, like the music, it doesn't age, and it's a feel-good show. The audience, and I've been in a lot of audiences recently that weren't so happy or weren't so thrilled. The audience is happy. What more do you want?
No, you've given us 2 evenings there. They're obviously going to be enormous. The 39 Steps of Mamma Mia, and A Long Day's Journey into Night is not a bundle of laughs. No. And you're slightly iffy about the way it's presented on this occasion. But I should probably be drawn to it yet again. I just can't keep away. Thank you very much, Stefan Kyriazis. You are watching Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. That concludes the first hour of the programme. Stay with me. We'll be discussing Israel and Ukraine after the break. And we'll be discussing Patricia Highsmith. See you after the break.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see a mixture of sunshine and showers across the UK, quite blustery winds too. We have the remnants of Storm Kathleen up towards the northwest of Scotland there, tightly packed isobars indicating those blustery conditions. These bands of rain here on these occlusions moving in from the west at times, bring a fair few showers. Most of the showers up towards the northwest merging to some longer spells of rain. In fact, we have a wind warning enforced across the west of Scotland throughout the afternoon. Gusts of wind here up to 60 miles an hour or so at times. And notice quite a few showers moving in across Wales into northern England and the far southwest of England too. In the best of the sunshine towards the southeast, we'll see highs of 17 Celsius, 63 in Fahrenheit, feeling colder towards the north in that blustery wind. As we go into the evening and during the overnight period, those showers across the south of the UK will tend to ease for a time, but notice some more persistent rain working back in from the southwest into parts of Wales, certainly by the end of the night. And towards the north, showers continue towards the northwest of Scotland. Elsewhere, some clear spells, allowing it to turn quite chilly. Parts of Scotland dipping down into low to mid-single figures, but holding up in the south with that cloud of rain coming in. As for Monday, outbreaks of rain gradually push up from the south across much of England and Wales. There will be some brightness for a time, particularly out towards the east and southeast. Best of the sunshine, though, generally reserved for parts of Scotland. Still some blustery showers towards the far northwest of Scotland. And temperatures once again peaking at 16 or 17 Celsius towards the southeast. And a bit cooler towards the north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News. The death of 3 British aid workers distributing food in Gaza on behalf of the charity World Central Kitchen has ramped up pressure on the British government to criticise or even to sanction Israel. Hundreds of lawyers signed a letter to Rishi Sunak warning that Britain could be in violation of international law by sending arms to the Israelis. We'll consider that letter with the legal director of UK Lawyers for Israel, Natasha Hausdorff. Vladimir Putin is believed to have enlisted as many as 300,000 extra troops ahead of an anticipated summer offensive. Ukraine remains starved of vital artillery and air defence systems. In the United States, even a vote on more military aid for Ukraine is thought to be weeks away. The Spectator's Svetlana Morinets will join me to look ahead to what the summer has in store for her home country. When Patricia Highsmith devised the character of Thomas Ripley, a charming New York vagrant with murderous tendencies, she was confident that she was onto a winner, but she could scarcely imagine how many successful adaptations of her work would be produced. The latest of them, a new Netflix series called simply Ripley, has now been released. We'll discuss the enduring appeal of the character with author Alex Larman. And finally, as part of my Taste of Britain series, I'll be speaking to the fantastic baker Cynthia Stroud, MBE, who's going to bring in some of her delicious creations for me to try. All of that ahead, but first your headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon. 1 minute past 12, our top stories. Rishi Sunak says the government continues to stand by Israel's right to defend its security 6 months on from the October 7 terror attacks. Marking that occasion, the Prime Minister said the UK is shocked by the bloodshed and called for an immediate humanitarian pause in fighting. He also urged Hamas to release its hostages and implored Israel to get aid into Gaza more swiftly. Well, meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has used the occasion to stress that the UK's support for Israel is not unconditional. Writing in the Sunday Times, Lord Cameron said there is no doubt where the blame lies over the death of 3 British aid workers. And he added that this must never happen again. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby died in airstrikes carried out by the IDF on an aid convoy on April 1st. Former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Elwood, told us the UK will be obliged to stop arms sales if Israel has broken international law.
I absolutely support Israel's right to prosecute and to go after Hamas after what they did. But I also disagree with Israel's military response, which seems to be without clarity of what its strategy is. What's the governance structure that it's working towards? What is going to be the post-security environment that it's building? What we're seeing is actually in information, we're seeing this conflict spread beyond the Middle East because of what's going on, because of what Israel is doing. That is why David Cameron is saying there needs to be conditions on what's going on.
The Deputy Prime Minister has denied claims that the UK is failing to prepare for war. Oliver Dowden is defending the government after outgoing Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told The Telegraph only Ministry of Defence officials attended a wartime preparation exercise which was meant for the whole of government. Former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has backed him up, saying too many in government are, quote, just hoping everything will go away. But Oliver Dowden told GB News they're putting in the necessary work.
Well, I don't know the specific incident that James was referring to. It is the case that we carry out wide-scale exercising programmes across government. Indeed, I did one recently for a national power outage involving several thousand different people across government. Now, of course, there is more work that we need to do across different areas, but we have stepped up considerably our effort.
A man in his 20s has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the discovery of a human torso at a nature reserve in Salford. Greater Manchester Police launched a murder investigation after the body part was found wrapped in plastic at Kersal Wetlands. The victim is believed to have been older than 40. Chief Superintendent Tony Creeley says the suspect, who is from the local area, will be questioned later on today. Well, meanwhile, 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder after human remains were discovered in a park in South London. The Met Police say a 44-year-old man and a 48-year-old woman are now in custody after the body parts were found in Roden Fields in Croydon. The force say they believe the remains are those of one person. However, they have been unable to formally identify the victim at this time. A post-mortem examination is expected to take place today. Well, Scotland remains at risk of power cuts and travel disruption as Storm Kathleen continues to bring strong gusts and heavy rain. 43 flood warnings are currently in place, and the Met Office has issued a new yellow wind warning affecting the East and Northern Highlands, the Isle of Skye and the Hebrides too. Yesterday, winds reached 73 miles per hour in Drumalbin, South Lanarkshire. The Scottish Environmental Protection Agency says there is real danger to life around causeways, coastal roads and paths. Meteorologist John Ketley told GB News it is still causing problems.
Yes, Storm Kathleen is certainly creating a few problems in the northwest of the country in particular, but it's blowing everywhere.
and it's still blowing pretty strongly this morning as well. I'm sure there are a few trampolines being blown over, a few garden fences coming down as well. Kathleen is only just to the northwest of the Hebrides. It's just easing slightly, but it's still gusting over 60 miles an hour in parts of the northwest this morning.
For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, back to Michael.
Thank you, Ray Addison. For news headlines that are dominated by Israel and Gaza. And hundreds of lawyers signed a letter to the government this week alleging that Britain is violating international law by delivering weapons to Israel. The letter claimed that the ruling of the International Court of Justice found a plausible risk of genocide in Gaza, where, it says, conditions are catastrophic. The letter went on to say that Britain has a legal obligation to prevent any such genocide. I'm joined by Natasha Hausdorff, Legal Director of UK Lawyers for Israel. Welcome back to GB News. Using the law in this conflict is very important. We sometimes call it lawfare. And I would say that this letter has had quite a big impact, with a lot of people taking it at face value, that what it says about Israel being in breach, about the possibility of genocide and so on, that this is all established. But you argue with some of that, don't you?
Well, I would say that it's perhaps using and abusing the law, and this letter has now also been the subject of a response sent also last week to the Prime Minister, signed by now over 1,000 lawyers, including former members of the Supreme Court, as well as the Justice Minister, former Justice Minister, Lord Wolfson, the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Lord MacDonald. There are very senior lawyers indeed that have signed on to this, a letter calling out not just the serious error and misstatement of law that was set forth in that original erroneous letter, which you've referenced, but also, unfortunately, calling out the basis upon which the supposed legal assessment was made, which is a false basis. It's quoting Hamas statistics in terms of casualty figures. And so this combination of false facts and false law, coupled with really problematic legal analysis, has clearly shifted the debate and is the subject, I'm afraid, of serious misinformation. It's a situation in which the public are being misinformed.
A lot hangs on this. We heard Tobias Ellwood a moment ago in that clip saying that Britain would need to move into line with international law, that this would end up with Britain, etc., probably, not supplying arms to Israel. So a lot hangs on it. So let's begin with, what is it that has been misunderstood about what the International Court of Justice has said?
Well, the clear error that this letter was predicated on was a misstatement that the International Court of Justice held in January in its provisional order that Israel well, some have called it plausibly guilty of genocide. What the letter, in fact, referred to was a seemingly invented term of plausible risk. Now, that doesn't feature in the judgment at all. And the day after this letter was released, the preeminent legal journalist Joshua Rosenberg pointed out this error and, in fact, clarified for all of those 600 signatories that the court had, in fact, considered the plausibility that the right South Africa was claiming in its application to the International Court of Justice, the plausibility that those rights fell within the Genocide Convention. It's a remarkably low threshold, but it is important and a significant distinction, what may sound like a technical one, because it puts the lie to this suggestion that Israel has in any way, even plausibly, been found guilty of genocide, or that there is in fact a plausible risk that has been established. And that is unfortunately the false basis upon which all of the discussions we've seen over the last few days about arms embargoes have been predicated. And clearly it's causing serious damage because we've got a series of civil servants who are voicing their concerns. But principally, the critical issue here is that Hamas is drawing succour from the manner in which this discussion has shifted. They've already rejected offers of a ceasefire that the Americans have endorsed. And what we see is that this very dangerous position that is being advanced is working to Hamas's favour. It is prolonging the conflict because all that Hamas have to do in order to succeed, in order for them to be victorious in their eyes, is survive. And these calls for an immediate ceasefire off the back of this misinformation are serving Hamas's purpose, prolonging this conflict and ultimately costing lives on both sides.
Let us deal with another legal issue, which is the issue of applicability. I mean, is the judgment, whatever it is, applicable to Britain?
This is the ICJ provisional measures.
I beg your pardon, yes.
Well, it's not a judgment in the sense of there's been no ruling on the merits, but critically, this is a case between South Africa and the United Kingdom, and any rule... forgive me, I'm so sorry, between South Africa and Israel. Your question is to do with the United Kingdom. So any decision ultimately by the court will be binding on the parties to the case. That's another misstatement of international law to suggest that the UK would be bound by those specific findings. However, the United Kingdom is a party to the Genocide Convention, as of course is Israel. And that is the legal hook that has been used. If you ask me, the allegations of genocide are so palpably unfounded. It is a blood libel that has been advanced, but it has been done so for particular legal reasons, and that is because it serves as a hook, both for Israel, but also ultimately for the United Kingdom and other signatories to the Genocide Convention.
So the counter letter, which is signed by 1,000 lawyers, which you've mentioned today...
And counting.
And counting, more people are adding their names. I dare say they might be to the first letter as well. So that deals with these arguments, yes?
It points out the error that the first letter was based on. It's a much shorter letter than would be required to counter absolutely every element of the first one. There is more rebuttal forthcoming.
Now, are numbers of people being killed relevant? Obviously, there is a dispute between the Ministry of Health, which is Hamas-controlled, which produces one set of figures, other figures which are circulating. However, is it denied that large numbers of civilians are losing their lives, including lots of children?
Well, I think the difficulty with that is defining large numbers. What is clear is even on these unsubstantiated, and many have called them out as false numbers that Hamas has been putting out, they're internally inconsistent, and the manner in which they have gone up on a daily basis is a real cause of alarm in terms of the consistency. And there's an awful lot of open source analysis, which in fact the letter footnotes, this is the response letter, which is important for people to realise. But quite aside from that, even if we were going to go according to the Hamas figures themselves, taking into account the fact that Israel knows that it has killed at least 13,000 terrorists, which are not accounted for in those figures at all. There's no distinction between terrorists and civilians that Hamas puts out. They fail to...
Do you know how Israel knows that it's killed 13,000?
So on the basis of intelligence, the numbers could in fact be far higher than that, but because Israel is democratic and accountable, it only puts out information it is 100% sure of. There is an intelligence basis of the individuals that they have identified that are killed that have links either with Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or other terrorist organisations operating in the Gaza Strip, trying to target Israelis on a daily basis. So those numbers we can, in fact, trust. They are the subject of accountability and, indeed, applications by NGOs on a regular basis to the courts in Israel. So if we compare the numbers that we know that of terrorists that have been killed and also take into account the fact that we don't know how the people that Hamas are claiming have been killed. What we do know is that Hamas have been killing their own civilians. They've been shooting them, bombing them. Even the Americans have established that this is the case, as well as, of course, committing this grave war crime of using civilians as human shields in order to drive up the civilian casualty figures. Taking into account all of that, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu assessed on the basis of the information he has, that the Israeli government has, that they are looking at a civilian to combatant casualty ratio of 1-to-1. That is unheard of in armed conflict, not to speak of the kind of armed conflict that Israel is involved in the intensely populated Gaza Strip, where Hamas has spent 16 years embedding its terror infrastructure in civilian neighbourhoods. When we compare that to the global average put out by the United Nations, which is 9-to-1, it's incomparable, and it's unprecedented, the measures that Israel has been taking to protect civilian life. It couldn't be further from the claims of that utterly misguided letter last week.
Quite briefly, can we move from the legal arguments to the political? And I would put it to you that Hamas, that 6 months ago today, launched a savage attack on Israel, murdering and raping and taking hostages, has today achieved amazing political objectives. That is to say that the democracies of the world, which are supposed to be the natural allies of the democracy Israel, one by one, are reducing their enthusiasm or peeling away or thinking about withdrawing their support. And is not Hamas delighted with this result?
Oh, of course, this has been its objective for the last 6 months. That's why it deploys these appalling tactics, and it uses its breaches of international humanitarian law to its advantage. I mentioned earlier that Hamas's only hope here is to survive. That's why there have been calls for Israel to be prevented from going into Rafah and ending this war with Hamas being destroyed and the hostages being returned. Let's, of course, not lose sight of the 134 hostages that remain within the Gaza Strip. I know that the Foreign Secretary has today again called for the hostages to be returned, but linking that with calls for an immediate ceasefire before the hostages are returned and Hamas is defeated is serving Hamas's purposes here, and it is encouraging them. And that is critical not just in respect of Israel, because Hamas is an Iranian proxy, just like Hezbollah, that continues to fire on Israel in the north of the country. And these proxies don't intend to end their battle against the West with Israel. Israel is fighting the West's war here, and these calls are doing untold damage to that much broader objective also.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Natasha Hausdorff. After the break, I'll be speaking to Ukrainian journalist Svetlana Moronets of The Spectator magazine as Russia prepares a new summer offensive to take more ground in eastern Ukraine.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Danny, there's an irony here, isn't there? And that is this. On the one hand, the BBC expect older viewers to cough up more, and yet every opinion poll in the land shows us, Danny, that older people are the least satisfied with the service they get.
Well, the BBC don't give a damn about older people because, as I discovered when I was binned for being 50 and white from the BBC in the Midlands to diversify the lineup, they're after a younger audience because the longevity of the institution, that's the BBC, Martin, relies on the next generation of licence fee payers. And this is quite important, and it's a great point that you've raised. Anybody who's over the age of 50, certainly 60, the BBC doesn't care about you because they're interested in attracting the next generation of licence fee payers. And when those 25-year-olds that they're after at the moment become 40 and 45, they'll stop caring about them too. Otherwise, the BBC just won't exist. It relies on new blood, if you like, when it comes to the licence fee. So that's a great point. They just don't care about middle-aged people.
And yet, they're now floating the idea of older people paying more. How would that work? Would it be means-tested?
I know if ever you wanted to satisfy your curiosity that the BBC had a socialist agenda, it's the fact that they want the proletariat to pay more, to not pay, and the bourgeoisie to pick up the bill. This is classic Marxism for you. I know we're treating this lightly, Martin, but how would they means test you? Are you going to have to provide evidence of your bank account? And of course, people's financial situation, they change. You know, people's finances are fluid. So one year you may be what they class as wealthy, and then the next year you're not. So it's a situation that I find just impossible. How it's going to work, I just don't know. It's something that I just don't feel happy about.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Welcome back. These are perilous months for Ukraine. Starved of ammunition and vital weapons, the country is poorly placed to fend off an expected Russian offensive in the summer. which Vladimir Putin is believed to have mobilized up to 300,000 more troops. In Washington, although the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is reportedly keen to do a deal on aid, a vote might not happen for weeks. To look ahead to what all that might mean, I'm joined now by Svitlana Moronets, who covers her native Ukraine for The Spectator magazine. Welcome back to GB News. Vladimir Putin supposedly recruiting another 300,000 soldiers, which on the one hand is very threatening. On the other hand, I suppose it's a kind of testimony to the rate of attrition that Russia has suffered during this war so far.
Yes, of course, but also he has over 400,000 soldiers on Ukraine's front line, and there are big fears in Ukraine that actually Russian upcoming offensive can be really successful. First is because Ukraine doesn't have enough weapons and ammunition to fight them back, and second because we don't have so many people in our army. That's why the topic of conscription has been all over Ukraine, and only last week Zelensky lowered the age or minimum age for conscription from 27 to 25 years old. So younger men are going to be called up to Ukrainian army. And also Ukraine is preparing by building defensive lines in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv regions, and also in Sumy region at the border with Belarus. Our intelligence says that there are no signs that invasion from Belarus can happen, but this week, Lukashenko said that he doesn't want a war, but he is preparing it, and his troops have been exercising. So we need to be ready in that case if they just decide to attack again from all the sides.
So the question of conscription in Ukraine is now settled. Minimum age of 25, is that right?
Yes, minimum age of 25.
And that will lead to another tranche of men being enlisted, men and women?
Men are obliged to be enlisted, but women can volunteer, but they are not being conscripted, but they can join the army, of course. And those men enlisted, they will be trained from 2 to 3 months, and then they will go to the front line.
What do you think of the critical shortages of weapons and equipment?
It's very bad. Right now, our soldiers have to find a way out, have to replace the shortage of artillery shells. So they launch homemade drones instead of artillery. And of course, the damage capability is not the same. You can't compare it, but they have to do at least something. And the only successful Ukrainian strategy so far has been striking Russian drone factories inside of Russia and other factories that produce weapons and oil refineries, energy facilities. It's the only way to make war painful for Russia.
Tell us about the importance of this city, Kharkiv.
So Kharkiv is the second largest city in Ukraine, and for the last 2 weeks, Russia has been bombing it every day. As we talk right now, just like 2 minutes before going live, I checked the news, and Kharkiv is being bombed right now. And last week, Russia destroyed all the power plants in the city, leaving 200,000 people without electricity. So there are talks that Kharkiv can be the goal for Russian offensive. Also, our government says that all of this is Russian disinformation, and they're not going to attack Kharkiv. But they're really fierce that they are preparing for it because they are destroying the city. They are making, of course, people are start leaving the city because they feel in danger, because they are being bombed every day. And we don't have enough air defenses to protect it. Yesterday, Zelensky said that Ukraine needs 25 Patriot air defense system to cover all of Ukraine.
And they would have to come from the United States, would they not?
No, from any of our allies. All of our allies combined, I mean Western allies, they have over 100 Patriot systems.
Right.
And we are asking for 25, but even not 25, if we have like from 5 to 7, it will boost our air defense a lot. And our foreign minister recently said, like, give us them and Patriots. I don't understand why they don't do that, because you don't suffer everyday attacks as Ukraine suffer. And I mean, we will give them back when everything is over. Why can't you give them the Patriots? Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Ukrainian public opinion towards, for example, the United States. This tremendous package is delayed in the House. As I was saying a moment ago, it doesn't look like there'll even be a vote on this for some very long time. So What do Ukrainians think? Are they angry? Are they frustrated? What's the feeling about it?
They are very angry, and it looks like US is losing its look like a global power, you know, and we feel like abandoned, and they promise to help us as long as it takes, but it seems to be over.
And this, of course, affects not only your ability to fight the war, but it affects your morale. And morale is a very important factor in war too.
Yes, but we were very lucky. For example, the Czech Republic started the artillery shells initiative, and they found like over 1 million shells globally, even buying them from Russian allies, and like different countries, they joined and they like gave some money to buy those artillery shells for Ukraine. But how long we are going to last on those artillery shells, we don't know. You know, the thing is that those countries from Eastern Europe, they know the real threat of Russia, and they feel threatened all the time. For example, why Baltic countries give us all what they have, all of their weapons, because they know that the threat is real and they could be next. But the US, I think, they feel that they are so far from Russia, and also they worry about their oil prices can go up if Ukraine strikes Russian energy facilities. And for us, it sounds ridiculous.
Yes, and it's not only the difference between, as you say, the Baltics and the United States. I was making the point last week on this programme that there really is a divide in Europe, depending upon how far you are from Russia. So, you know, Britain and France can take this fairly easily, whereas the Baltic states and Poland are, you know, deeply exercised. Thank you very much indeed, Svetlana Morenets. The Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire has started a fundraising campaign this month to raise £45,000 to restore its Shot at Dawn memorial. It commemorates the hundreds of servicemen who, during the First World War, were court-martialled and executed for crimes such as desertion or cowardice. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson has this report.
In World War I, 309 soldiers from Britain and the Commonwealth were shot at dawn. The majority killed for the likes of desertion, cowardice and sleeping at post. Appearing at their court-martial with no real opportunity for defence, these men were told they had brought shame on their country and would be held in the highest disregard to discourage anyone else from doing the same. Today, it's widely recognised that many of the soldiers were likely suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. In 2001, the Shot at Dawn Memorial was unveiled at the National Memorial Arboretum as a way to remember the hundreds who had been killed. Now, more than 20 years on, the Arboretum has launched a fundraising campaign to ensure the preservation of the site. Mark Ellis is the National Memorial Arboretum lead.
It's a really important memorial here at the Arboretum, a must-see for very many of our visitors. So millions of pairs of feet have walked around it and looked at it. But it's also in an area of site that gets a lot of flooding, particularly in recent times. We need to raise around £45,000 to renovate and restore the memorial and to make sure that we can look after it for generations to come. The posts need replacing, the ground needs relaying and redoing.
In front of the statue are 6 conifer trees to represent the firing squad aiming for the target around the statue's neck. Andy de Comin is the sculptor behind the piece.
Obviously very young looking. The disc around his neck is actually a target. They used to either pin a piece of paper to them or have some sort of target for the firing squad to aim at so that it was over the top of the heart. You'll see that he's got no buttons, his epaulette's fallen from his shoulder. Part of the court-martial would have been dishonourable discharge, so they've been stripped of rank and insignia. His feet are trapped in this block. It's kind of a metaphor for the fact that he's trapped in a situation that he can't extricate himself from, and then obviously blindfolded, hands tied behind his back.
The memorial sits on the eastern edge of the Arboretum site, where it's the first to be touched by the sun's rays at dawn.
On the 7th of November 2006, the British government agreed to give a posthumous pardon to those executed for varying military offences in the First World War. One of those soldiers was 17-year-old Herbert Burden.
He was part of the 1st Battalion Northumberland Fusiliers, and at 16 he had lied that he was 2 years older so he could fight in the war. 10 months later, he was court-martialled after leaving his post, reportedly to comfort a bereaved friend stationed nearby. The officers considering Burden's case heard his unit had been issued orders to make for the front just before he went missing. Private Burden faced the firing squad on the 21st of July 1915. At 17, he was still too young to even officially be in his regiment. Work begins on the memorial in early May, and with the help of public donations, the Arboretum hopes the memories of those shot at dawn can live on for decades to come. Jack Carson, GB News, Staffordshire.
Jack Carson talking about the Shot at Dawn Memorial. In a few minutes, I'll be discussing the enduring fascination with the character of Thomas Ripley. But before that, your headlines with Ray Addison.
It's 12:31, our top stories this hour. Rishi Sunak says the government continues to stand by Israel's right to defend its security 6 months on from the October 7 terror attacks. Marking the occasion, the Prime Minister said the UK is shocked by the bloodshed and called for an immediate humanitarian pause in fighting. He also urged Hamas to release its hostages and implored Israel to get aid into Gaza more swiftly. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary has used the occasion to stress that the UK's support for Israel is not unconditional. Writing in the Sunday Times, Lord Cameron said there is no doubt where the blame lies over the death of 3 British aid workers, and he added that this must never happen again. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby died in airstrikes carried out by the IDF on an aid convoy on April 1st. Well, the Deputy Prime Minister has denied claims that the UK is failing to prepare for war. Oliver Dowden is defending the government after outgoing Armed Forces Minister James Heappey told The Telegraph only Ministry of Defence officials attended a wartime preparation exercise, which was meant for the whole of government. Former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has backed him up, saying too many in government are, quote, just hoping everything will go away. A man in his 20s has been arrested on suspicion of murder following the discovery of a human torso at a nature reserve in Salford. Greater Manchester Police launched a murder investigation after the body part was found wrapped in plastic at Kersal Wetlands. The victim is believed to have been older than 40. Well, for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code. It's on your screen right now, or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Michael will be back right after this.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
The real danger to our democracy, of course, always was China. And we learn overnight. We'd heard in August last year that the Electoral Commission's website had been compromised, their database had been compromised. And we learn overnight that, yes, actually, the Chinese Communist Party now have access to 40 million voters in this country and their data. Well, to respond to this in the House of Commons earlier, we heard from the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden.
I can confirm today that Chinese state-affiliated actors were responsible for 2 malicious cyber campaigns targeting both our democratic institutions and parliamentarians. That is why the United Kingdom has today sanctioned 2 individuals and 1 entity associated with the Chinese state-affiliated APT31 group for involvement in malicious cyber activity targeting officials, government entities and parliamentarians around the world.
I don't know how tough that sounds to you in terms of a response, but one Member of Parliament, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, was, shall we say, less than impressed.
Whilst I welcome these 2 sanctions from the government, it is a little bit, this statement, like an elephant giving birth to a mouse. The reality is that in those 3 years, the Chinese have trashed the Sino-British agreement. They have been committing murder and slave labour and genocide in Xinjiang. We have had churches broken and, in Hong Kong, false court cases against Jimmy Lai.
Great quote, elephant giving birth to a mouse. I rather like that. Sir Ian's here. I'll ask him about where that came from in a moment. But it's all going to be OK. It's all going to be absolutely fine.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. A new interpretation of Tom Ripley has been released on Netflix to positive reviews. It's the latest in a catalogue of on-screen depictions of the roguish character who lies, cheats and murders his way from near vagrancy in New York to the most glamorous cities in Europe. Tom Ripley first came to life in the pages of Patricia Highsmith's thriller The Talented Mr. Ripley. And as my next guest has written this week, Highsmith knew almost immediately that she was onto a winner with such a compelling character. Alex Larman from The Spectator magazine joins us now. Very nice to see you on GB News. And just before we start talking, we're going to look at a little clip from the Netflix adaptation.
You're a very hard man to find. No address, phone, office.
Tom. Where's Tom?
Tom Ripley.
Tom Ripley?
Thomas Ripley.
I like the name.
Tom what?
Ripley.
Well, a number of things are obvious from that clip. The first being that it's in black and white, and another being that it stars Andrew Scott. Now, what do you make of it?
Well, I thought it was really good. I mean, it's very slow, and actually, the first episode, if you're expecting this to be a sort of edge-of-seat thriller, you'd be quite disappointed because it's a very, very carefully paced character study. And obviously, when the murdering starts, it does speed up a bit. But I mean, for an American series on Netflix, it's quite experimental because it's all in black and white. It's set over 8 parts, which makes it, about 8 hours in duration. But it's the way in which, if we take the Anthony Minghella film from 1999, which is much more operatic, much more sympathetic lead character and so forth, 25 years later, we have a completely different interpretation of Ripley as this man who essentially is almost like motiveless malignity, as Coleridge said. But except, of course, what's interesting about Ripley is he has a very clear motive. It's that he enjoys doing the things he does. And I think Scott's marvellous. I mean, he's...
I thought you said that he didn't enjoy murder unless it was strictly necessary.
But one feels with Ripley this is always tongue-in-cheek. There's always a sense that if he can get away with it, he will.
Another thing that struck me about the clip was that it's obviously beautifully shot.
And I think that might be a legacy of lockdown, because I think it was filmed around 2021 in Italy. So it's very underpopulated streets, which under normal circumstances would seem very strange. But in the case of this, it works perfectly, because there is a sense that Ripley is almost consuming everything and everyone around him. And I think that works incredibly well.
Did it weary you to watch it in black and white? It is only in black and white.
Well, the weird thing about black and white is it makes Italy, which is such a beautiful country, seem very sinister. And I think black and white should be used more often, actually. I mean, when we've had it in cinema recently, it does work exceptionally well because you have such gorgeous deep blacks and greys and so forth. And, I mean, all the cast look amazing in it.
Not everyone will be familiar with The Talented Mr. Ripley, so let's step back away. How many books did Patricia Highsmith write that featured Ripley?
5, and she started off with The Talented Mr. Ripley in 1955, and she was inspired because she was in Positano and she was standing on her balcony and she saw this young man walking along the street and she thought to herself, that man is American and he's been sent here. And that gave her the idea of creating this character, who I think is her most indelible character. And he is somebody who
generations of readers have taken to their hearts, despite the fact that he is this. On the one hand, he is very charming and very erudite and very cultured. On the other hand, he is a psychopathic murderer. So he pays you money, he takes your choice.
And why was Ripley sent to Europe? What was his purpose?
Well, Ripley's initially sent to Europe by this man called Greenleaf to retrieve his son Dickie, who's this kind of playboy leading this rather licentious existence in Italy. And of course, what Ripley does is initially he is attracted to Dickie and to his lifestyle. And then in the fullness of time, he murders Dickie and assumes his identity. And all this is done in this incredibly carefully created prose. I mean, Highsmith was a fantastic prose stylist, but of course what she also knew, her first novel, Strangers on a Train, was adapted for film by Alfred Hitchcock. So from the very start of her career, there's always a sense that she understood what it would be like for screen adaptation. I suppose the only surprise that I have is we've only had 2 major adaptations of The Talented Mr. Ripley in 25 years. You'd have thought there might have been more.
And if someone were now trying to make a choice, if we've sort of titivated them, they think, oh, this is an interesting subject to delve into, would you say that they should watch the Anthony Minghella 1999 movie, or should they now watch this black and white version on Netflix, one being, at least 4 times longer than the other?
The Anthony Minghella film is, for my one of the greatest films ever made, so I would recommend that anyone goes to watch that first. But this is fascinating. I mean, this is experimental in the best way. It's got a fantastic cast. I mean, Andrew Scott has been the man of the moment for quite some time now. And I mean, this is a great performance. It's miles away from what he was doing on stage in Vanya or in All of Us Strangers on film. But he's so compelling that you ignore the fact that he, in his late 40s, is 20 years older than the character that Highsmith created. And he's got that absolute magnetism where you're not sympathetic towards him, but you want to know what he does next. And I think that's the key to Ripley. It's the fact that he is this character that he's always 2 steps ahead of you, either as a reader or as a viewer.
I think I'm sold. Thank you very much indeed. Alex Larmam talking there about Ripley, as it's called simply, on Netflix. More labour for me after the break, as I'll be sampling delicious cakes brought in by baker and food judge Cynthia Stroud. Stay with us. Thoroughly.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We'll see a mixture of sunshine and showers across the UK, quite blustery winds too. We have the remnants of Storm Kathleen up towards the northwest of Scotland there, tightly packed isobars indicating those blustery conditions. These bands of rain here on these occlusions moving in from the west at times, bring a fair few showers. Most of the showers up towards the northwest merging to some longer spells of rain. In fact, we have a wind warning enforced across the west of Scotland throughout the afternoon. Gusts of wind here up to 60 miles an hour or so at times. And notice quite a few showers moving in across Wales into northern England and the far southwest of England too. In the best of the sunshine towards the southeast, we'll see highs of 17 Celsius, 63 in Fahrenheit, but feeling colder towards the north in that blustery wind. As we go into the evening and during the overnight period, those showers across the south of the UK will tend to ease for a time, but notice some more persistent rain working back in from the southwest into parts of Wales, certainly by the end of the night. And towards the north, showers continue towards the northwest of Scotland. Elsewhere, some clear spells, allowing it to turn quite chilly. Parts of Scotland dipping down into low to mid-single figures, but holding up in the south with that cloud of rain coming in. As for Monday, outbreaks of rain gradually push up from the south across much of England and Wales. There will be some brightness for a time, particularly out towards the east and southeast. Best of the sunshine, though, generally reserved for parts of Scotland. Still some blustery showers towards the far northwest of Scotland. And temperatures once again peaking at 16 or 17 Celsius towards the southeast. That bit cooler towards the north.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for 2 worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Transformation. You will see in a moment that the breakfast bar before me has been festooned with delicious-looking cakes. They are the work of my guest baker extraordinaire, Cynthia Stroud. Cynthia, marvellous to have you here.
Thank you.
And you have a very successful, I believe, wedding cake business. Is that right?
Yes, I do.
Which is great. How do people access your business?
Well, so this is the awkward bit. So they can't actually technically order any more cakes from me because I've shut that bit now. I've now gone into helping people set up their own businesses, specifically young girls who...
Well, and baking businesses or not particularly baking businesses?
Sorry?
Baking businesses.
Well, the whole idea is that the idea is based on around baking business, but you can actually extend that to anything that, you know, has anything to do with craft.
So you brought 3 magnificent specimens here, and you are going to direct the order of events. With which one should we begin?
I think it's actually worth working from lightest to darkest because it gets messier and better as you go along. So
that's very reasonable.
We start from the sponge.
So I believe this is the lightest.
Yes, indeed.
And what I'm going to do is I'm very gently going to angle this towards the camera and hoping that it won't slide off.
Do you know, most men are so nervous when they carry cake.
That is a gorgeous cake. Tell me a little bit about that.
So that is a twist on the classic Victoria sponge, but, well, I don't like to do anything ordinary. So that's actually a Bucks Fizz cake. So it's a cross between an orange cake, if you imagine the taste of an orange cake, with the fizz of a champagne cake.
We have to taste this.
You do.
Now, how complicated was that to make? It sounds pretty complicated.
It really isn't.
No.
You can use any oranges you have in a fruit basket, use the zest, and then you make a simple syrup from the orange juice and any bit of champagne you have left over that's lost its fizz. And then you drizzle that.
As you say, it's lost its fizz. Will we be aware of that champagne in this cake?
I want you to be the judge of that.
OK, great. So I'm being mother here. I must say it is a thing of beauty, your cake.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a fork.
Thank you.
So let us taste. So as you say, Victoria sponge is the basis of it all.
Indeed.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can. There is a zest to it. So isn't that remarkable?
It's like an orange cake, but then it has that slight champagne taste. So you feel a bit more grown up than if you were eating standard sponge.
And a bit jollier as well.
Exactly.
And what's that there? What's the lining between the
So the lining is the classic strawberry conserve and buttercream, which also has some champagne in the buttercream.
And buttercream. Now, you said go from light progressively towards darker.
Yes.
Which implies we're going to go to this fellow here.
Exactly.
Let me do my bit of
Right, I'll put that
showing this to the camera.
OK.
What are we talking about here?
So this is tiffin, which is actually my children's favourite because it's basically what you do when you have biscuit left over, chocolate left over, some raisins and milk chocolate. So all the Easter eggs went into that.
Oh, really? Any calories in that at all?
No,
No,
of course
good,
not. If you eat
marvellous.
it standing up, there's no calories. Everyone knows this.
So what is on the outer edges of this?
So it's a biscuit base.
Yes.
You melt some butter and syrup.
It takes quite a...
And then you mix it in a saucepan. You flatten it all, and then you put some melted chocolate.
Takes a bit of force to get through it.
It does, because it's not
very,
cake.
very biscuity.
It is very biscuity.
But it's also holding together very nicely.
Exactly. So
I'm not sure I even need a fork for this one.
No, you don't. It's more like a bar, really.
Yeah. So let's have a go at that.
Go for it.
That's marvellous.
Thank you.
So you make this sound like a real improvisation. Is this an invention of yours, pretty much?
It is. Well, most of my cakes are improvisations. But I don't like to do anything ordinary, and I found that if I would put my own twist on it, the clients come back to me. Mm-hmm. And then I started offering this, saying I can customize something for you.
Were you experimenting with wedding cakes?
Constantly.
Really? I would have thought people would be a bit conservative about wedding cakes.
Oh, no.
No?
No, I ended up with about 21 different flavours. Because if you tell me my nan used to make this and that thing, and nans are the origin of invention, because they had to make what was in the cupboard. So if you describe to me what your nan used to make, because I'm an organic baker, I learned how to bake myself by playing. I would often be able to recreate that in a stable format for a cake.
Now, apart from baking, and now you've moved on to advising businesses, you've also been a judge, a food judge, a TV food judge.
Yes, that's right.
But not in this country.
I've done some TV food judging in this country.
But mainly in Canada?
Mainly in Canada and America.
How extraordinary.
But it's not so much advising businesses. I don't do this for, as a consultancy. It's more just, I just want young girls to know you can turn any craft into a business and make money.
Tell me about the judging. Did that come naturally to you? I mean, were you squeamish about, telling people your frank opinion?
What do you mean? Was I judgy? Yes.
Yeah, were you judging? Yeah.
Well, yes. I wasn't squeamish because I would never be mean to anyone. I think because I learned how to bake at home by watching YouTube. I mean, how much of a high horse can I have, really? So I know how to talk to people, understanding that they're baking because they're trying to boost their self-confidence, but wanting them to be better. And then I would always tell you how to monetize whatever you're doing. So I'm very good at figuring out the shortcuts to make your business more viable.
Did you get to the stage, have you got to the stage in baking where you don't make mistakes? Because, I mean, very often when we're watching this baking on television, terrible things go wrong, don't they? Things don't rise that ought to rise. Have you got beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, I've done over 4,000 wedding cakes.
Wow.
I have gone a little bit past that. But I've also got to the point now where I don't really necessarily measure anything. You don't? I thought that was absolutely essential in baking. No, it's not. That is such... I mean, I guess people say that because they want it to seem like more of an art and no, the truth is, it's chemistry. You will see how the batter behaves and you will know when something is off.
Let's hope the butter isn't. Now, we held this one till last, partly because you said things were going to get messy.
It is the messy one, yes.
I'd like the camera to focus in on that cake and tell me all about it.
So that is, it is a brownie, but it's quite a fudgy, soft, gooey brownie. That brownie is really best eaten warm because then it's still a little bit oozy. That's cooled a little bit.
It looks a little bit like the surface of the moon.
Yes, indeed.
Was this intentional?
Yes.
Yes.
Because underneath that is not completely solid because you don't really want it to be a cake. Right. It's meant to be. It's meant to get your fingers messy. You're meant to have to lick your fingers when you finish that.
Right.
Yes.
Let's put that to the test.
There you go.
And you'll have a slice too, won't you?
Okay.
Here you go.
Thank you.
So, this is where it gets messy.
So this bit here is meant to be very, very fudgy.
I see, absolutely. So the profile of the slice changes as you get towards the middle. That's where all the fudge has lodged. Well, these are absolutely delicious.
Thank you, Michael.
Any seasonality to this? Can you eat this any time of year?
Absolutely. I was thinking, you know what? Everybody deserves good cake all the time.
Cynthia Stroud. Congratulations, by the way, on the MBE.
Thank you.
Absolutely charming to have you on the show. Thank you for bringing this range of delicious cakes, which I've enormously enjoyed. Thank you to all of my guests. I'm always so impressed when people come into the studio on a Sunday. I will be back at the same time next week, and very much looking forward to seeing you then. We are going to continue to eat these cakes. I just so much wish that you could taste what we're tasting now. Until next week, goodbye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to unsettled weather across the UK over the next few days, all of us seeing further rain at times, quite blustery winds too. Storm Kathleen starting to move off the sea now, away towards the north and west of Scotland. Notice a low pressure gathering once again towards the south-west of the UK, and that's set to bring more wind and rain as we head into Monday. Back to this evening though, and the showers are starting to ease across England and Wales, at least for a time, because as we go into the early hours of Monday, further outbreaks of rain start to push in from the southwest, certainly into parts of Wales by the end of the night. Whereas towards the north, a very blustery picture, certainly through the evening, some heavy showers around for a time. Those showers starting to ease into the early hours, more in the way of clear spells developing across the north of the UK, and in some rural spots, it could turn quite chilly by Monday morning. As for Monday itself, well, those outbreaks of rain out across parts of Wales will also become more widespread from the south across England and Wales as we go through the day. Some of those outbreaks of rain turning quite heavy across some southern areas into the afternoon. Whereas further north, Northern Ireland seeing some sunshine before rain arrives later. And for Scotland, it's a mostly fine day, lighter winds, more in the way of sunshine than on Sunday. And here it shouldn't feel too bad with those fairly gentle winds, temperatures of 10 to 12 Celsius, peaking at 16 or 17 though towards the southeast of England. Unfortunately, Tuesday looks very unsettled across the UK. Low pressure dominating the scene, further outbreaks of rain, quite blustery winds too, particularly wet out towards the north and west of the UK, and it stays pretty unsettled into the week ahead, perhaps a bit drier and a little bit warmer too come Thursday, temperatures up to 19 Celsius.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear